Greetings and welcome to the Hilaritas Press Podcast, where we explore the vast world of Robert Anton Wilson. In this episode, I chat with writer, artist, teacher, and boring suburban dad, Bobby Campbell. A charter member of the Maybe Logic Academy, where I first met him over 20 years ago, Bobby has made substantial contributions to the raw ecosphere, not the least of which has been the production of Maybe Day for going on 5 years now, and Maybe Night for the last 2. He's about to launch the Kickstarter for the second issue of his latest production, Tales of Illuminatus, a comic adaptation of the Illuminatus trilogy. You can find the link to that Kickstarter in the show notes, as well as links to Maybe Day and more. And so, right here, right now, it's my great pleasure to share with you my conversation with sci-fi cartoonist Bobby Campbell. Bobby Campbell. Is it Bob or Bobby?
You can go either way. I just for consistency, I always sign all my work as Bobby. But like in person, people call me Bob.
Okay. Yeah, I've known you as Bobby forever, and then I saw Bob pop up here and there, and I'm like, well, it's been
Yeah,
20
yeah.
years.
There's always a disconnect when I use something from like my real life in art life. Like I have a Zoom account that's connected up to my email, and in my email, I'm Bob because that's
Right.
who I am in real life. But in the art world, I'm Bobby. So there's always like a weird thing where it's where the two worlds kind of collide, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool. Well, Bobby Campbell, welcome back to the
Oh,
Hilaritas
thank you very much. I
Podcast.
appreciate you having me.
Yeah. So you've been doing the comic thing. It sounds like, I don't know what you call it, season 1 is wrapping up. Is that?
That's correct. Yeah. So issue one. So what we did was, so we put out the first issue, and then you know how they do that thing on streaming services where they figured out that if they drop everything all at once, then people stop talking about it because it's over.
Mm,
So it's thinking along similar lines, and also to make it so there was a free version that people could read. We serialized it after the initial chunk of pages dropped. Then we did an additional page every Thursday to one keep the thing going after it was already published, and two to provide a free version without the people who bought it feeling like they paid something for nothing. They got early access,
right.
and then yeah, and then also I kind of my dream is to eventually have like a Windsor McKay style distribution where it's just one beautiful page per week, like the old Little Nemo and Slumberland strips. That just seems like the ideal artist life, to just do like one page that you put everything into per week.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the thought behind it.
How did this all get started? It sounds like I find Illuminatus a daunting read.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
I'm the kind of person who would have to take notes and this and that. I read it once and I got a lot out of it, but it's just a lot there. So the idea to put it into comic format, I love that. And how did, how did it all start?
Sure, yeah. So Nick Helweg Larson, who has the media rights to Illuminatus, which I didn't know. I've known Nick for
Yeah.
25 years almost, and I didn't know. I know that I always knew that he was working on a screenplay for it, and so like I knew that he was doing something with it, but I didn't realize that um, like that he had actual like sway in how it would get produced.
Mm.
So he set up a meeting with me. I was thinking we were just going to have a conversation, just catching up with an old friend, and then he tells me he's got the rights to Illuminatus, and he's looking to have it adapted in various ways so that it can, basically to have more hooks in the water. And so he approached me about a comic adaptation. And I initially, like you say, it's such a daunting book, so like complicated, and how would you even do that? That I kind of spent 20 minutes telling him why I couldn't do it. Why, I'm like, no, you know what? And so as I was explaining why I couldn't do it, I ended up talking myself into it, because as I was saying why it wouldn't work, ideas like problem solving kind of kicked in. And I, started thinking of like, well, you could do it this way. Oh, you could do that. And then you could do that. And you could do that. And it just kind of built into this idea for how to do it. And so by the time I was done explaining why I couldn't do it, I had started to explain how I was going to do it. And it just kind of moved forward from there, kind of like one step at a time. It was a really, really long pre-production cycle. Like it was a long time, and there was a lot of false starts in terms of how to do it. There was, because one of the main things was, do you set it in modern times, or do you set it in the past times? And so there was a thought to originally to contemporize it, to make it about current times, because that's kind of one of the paths that you might take. And slowly, as I realized that Illuminatus works best as a period piece, like it almost works better than it being contemporary when it originally came out, to be this kind of like slice of history, and for it to be a kind of like Jackie Brown style period piece of an interesting time. And that like, here, I got the book right here. And then just one of the things that really got me into it was the idea that, like, on your opening shot, just showing the environment is interesting, because phone booths don't exist anymore. Those kind of taxi cabs don't exist anymore. And, like all those kind of elements of culture that I grew up in that are no longer around, all of a sudden become interesting. Landlines become this really interesting thing. And it's kind of ordinary in one sense, but extraordinary in another, which I thought was a good pathway into Illuminatus, which is to kind of take the ordinary and elevate it to something that was extraordinary. And that was kind of the early path into it. And then also I had an experience reading. Have you ever read The Yankee and Cowboy War?
Yeah, a long time ago.
And which is kind of like one of the underpinnings of Illuminatus, which I didn't read it for that. I just happened to have read it. And it was kind of awesome to read the seeds of our current historical situations, because you can see like, oh, this guy became that guy in history. Like these movements became those movements, became these movements. And that it was actually an interesting way to get at what is happening right now, is to look at what immediately preceded it, what had happened just before. And so basically to look at the political landscape of the 70s kind of gives you an interesting insight into what's going on right now, because that's where it came from.
Wow, that's a whole rabbit hole I hadn't even thought of, because if I remember right, the Cowboys were like the oil and energy guys, and the
Yep.
the
And the
Yankees were like the
Yankees,
East Coast bankers, I want to say.
right? And are they not still at it? Is that
Well,
not
that's
still?
what I was sitting here trying to tease out in my mind, which I'd probably take longer than I can do here on the fly, but it seems like things may be shifting.
I
But
don't know that the category stayed completely still, but you can still see the trajectory of, of how this group advanced these interests, this group advanced those, and then the overall the impression that I walked away from in that book is that there's this idea that there's competing ideologies, Whereas
Right.
really there's competing business interests. There's
Right.
not competing ideologies. It's just I sell widgets, you sell wadgets, and wadgets. I have to make it seem like they're morally superior to widgets because I sell widgets, you sell wadgets. Wadgets are bad, widgets are good. It's this kind of that's an oversimplification, but
Sure.
yeah, I think the ideologies work backwards from the business models.
That so what just occurred to me while you were talking too is you've really seen what I would not call big tech, but more innovative little tech is really taken over the Republican Party these days.
Yeah,
And that's been
yeah,
a
for
huge
sure.
shift in like the last year.
For sure. Yeah.
Ah, interesting. Huh.
And yeah, so it's kind of I find it interesting to see it from different angles than how it's presented because it's presented as something completely different from what I think is actually functionally going on. And so not to say that looking at it in this way is the correct or higher way, but at least if you can dimensionalize it more, you might kind of have a better idea of uh why things are going the way they're going.
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't even thought of a correlation between the Yankee Cowboy War and Illuminatus. So it makes me want to go back and dig into Illuminatus with that lens.
I even think that that initial subheading from Dealey Plaza to Watergate is a direct reference to the Yankee and Cowboy War. That's what the book's about. Is that it was kind of like a tit for tat exchange between these two groups.
Ah, wow. Great.
Yeah, so it's right. So once I started thinking about it in these terms, it became exciting and
Mm.
not a chore. It just became, because like when you first think about it, like all the characters and all the, because like
Yeah.
it's a lot of drawing people sitting around rooms talking, which is tough.
Right, right. Doesn't
You know what I mean? So when you think
sounds
about
tough.
like, yeah, so like how do you like when there's 20 pages of people sitting in a room talking, like how do you make that into a comic that's interesting to look at? Because you can only move the camera around so much to like,
Right.
keep that story moving. What works in a text does not necessarily work in a comic, just because of the way the action needs to move in one versus the way the action has to move in the other. And yeah, so what I started honing in on was to just follow the action in the text. So I kind of broke it down into these chunks of, all right, they're in this place doing this physical thing. Now they're in this place doing that physical thing. And then you just use all the text and just grab whatever's most interesting about it to decorate those movements. And it was the, so like, yeah. So before when it seemed like this incomprehensible, daunting task, there wasn't much forward movement on it. But then once I kind of had a process of how to break it down into something that was uh, viable as a comic, it started to move forward. And yeah, I mean, all the way throughout the entire thing up until I sent it to the publishers, there was an undercurrent of this is never going to work. This is never going to happen.
Wow.
I mean, there was yeah, like even up, so I released the first chunk of pages on Maybe Day, and that was a sprint even to get there. That was not like an easy thing. And
Yeah.
then to keep it going week after week after that, there was a couple of all-nighters to hit that deadline.
Mm.
But then it just like there was just a few kind of lucky days where the pages came together and the thing that I drew didn't need to be redone 20 times before it was good enough, and we hit all our deadlines. It was pretty a little bit lucky and a little bit I had help from my friend Todd, who took over a chunk of pages. came through wonderfully. And um, it was funny. Like as I was putting the book together, I kind of forgot that I had planned it well, because I like as as the deadlines are coming up, and you're just kind of like going off of instinct a little bit, because you've got to get a certain amount of stuff done by a certain time, and you're really just go 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 go. And then so it came time to do the switch over to the George Dorn pages, which I had my friend Todd doing. And I noticed in the book, it tees up this switch in the artist, because like when in the book, it actually makes more sense as written in the comic than it does in the novel, because in the novel it's like, get ready for a big switch, you're gonna jump, this is gonna be crazy, you're jumping into a different paradigm when it switches to the George Dorn stuff. And we switch artists, you do switch paradigms into this completely different thing. And my friend Todd Perse, who's a like outstanding cartoonist, he kind of embodied the like he's like a really good like underground cartoonist, and he kind of is George Dorn in a way. He's like a podcaster and a journalist. He's real big in the like UFO scene and the paranormal scene. He is George Dorn. Nice. And so it's like stunt casting. So I hand over the book literally to a George Dorn type to do the George Dorn pages, and it just worked. And that was my intention from the beginning, but I kind of forgot that that's what it was. And then when I looked at the book, when it all came together, I was like, it all somehow worked. And now we're going to try to do it again.
Excuse me. So that's to me one of those like meaningful synchronicity things in a way. Was there things like that as you immersed yourself in this project where the world got weird?
Yeah, for sure. It was there were times where things were coming together like too well. It almost just like, yeah, you know how they say the story takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And there were definitely parts of that where it was like, this is all fitting together suspiciously well. One of the main things, so indie comics is a tough business. It's like very unlikely for an indie comic to succeed in any sustainable way. The odds are against you tremendously, especially these days, because like printing is so expensive, shipping is so expensive, and what takes me 12 hours to make takes a reader 12 seconds to read, right? So in order to make it work, you have to charge too much money for something that is not enough. So the idea that an indie comic will be successful is very unlikely. So the idea that we're going to get through the entire Illuminatus trilogy is really, really slim, right? Like there's the idea that we're going to get through all 800 pages seems unlikely. Now we're going to try, we're going to do our best. And if things keep working out the way they are, it does seem like there's a path there. But you have to head into it with realistic expectations. Hence why it's called Tales of Illuminatus and not just Illuminatus, because there's a chance that we're going to have to have a contingency plan. And the contingency plan is built into the framing device of the story. So we start the story on a space station in, that's kind of blurry, but you kind of get the idea. We start the story on a space station and with a artificial intelligence called Sol, SOL, which is a acronym that we haven't revealed what it means yet in the story. But as we were going through it, it started to mean so many things. It started to connect with so many other aspects of like raw mythology and just the psychedelic philosophy of the time and of Hermetic philosophy, and just it felt like I had actually hit something that was true in something that was like more true than it just being a good name for a character in this book. Like it felt like it wasn't just an invention, it was a discovery. And because there was, and one of the readers in the comment section on the Substack just listed 5 more reasons, or 5 more interpretations of what soul means that I hadn't even considered. And so it just kind of spiraled out into this thing where it's like, wow, like this actually works more than I even intended it to. And there was just like several things that like fit together better than I could have hoped, and which is to be expected with Illuminatus, because that's kind of how Illuminatus works. That's why people have this relationship with the book, is because when you read it, it triggers these coincidences that then lead to other meaningful experiences, and that's how you get wrapped up in this book. So of course, working in it is going to have a similar effect. Yeah, it was funny. I was doing an interview with a guy from Comic Book Resources, and he saw the statue of Tylock in the opening pages, and he had a figurine of Tylock, which features heavily in the Illuminatus trilogy. It's a big part of it. And so just, however you approach it, I think there's coincidences that are going to stick with you, whether or not you react to them and get pulled into the story or not. Obviously, varies, but yeah. So I full on had the experience while creating Illuminatus, or Tales of Illuminatus, that you have when you read it. It definitely got spooky in a very fun way.
Nice. It seems like the visual media of comics allows for multiple interpretations in a way that text wouldn't.
Yeah, there's a lot of parts in it where it seems particularly well suited to visual interpretation, which makes sense because judging from the Gabriel Kennedy's Raw biography, he was gung ho about getting this made into a movie. Like it was very much at the forefront of his mind that they were going to write this book, it was going to get turned into a movie, and that was going to solve his financial problems. That was a huge part of it, and it makes sense. There's a lot of like very visual cues in the book that don't even necessarily like when they were setting up the atmosphere of the lobby of the confrontation building that gets bombed. There's just like really good visual direction in there. It tells you to look at the Charlie Chan movie, The Wax Museum, to get the atmosphere right. And so there's just all these like very detailed resources for visual interpretation that are just literally in the text. There's very little that needs to be invented. So which is the funnest part of the book is I really, as much as I invented the framing sequence, when we're actually dealing with the story, it's all selection, because there's not any invention that needs to be done, because you have so many different options that you're just selecting details, and that's where the creativity comes from, is in selecting the details that Wilson and Shea give, and then using that to shape the piece, as opposed to having to invent something, which is one of the things that made it so much easier to adapt. Was because I thought at the beginning, I was like, well, I'm going to have to understand this entire story to begin it. How do you begin a story that you don't completely understand? Except for then when you realize that Illuminatus is impossible to completely understand.
Right.
So how do you begin a story that is impossible to completely understand? And so what I did was, as much as I kind of cast Todd Perce in the role of George Dorn, I cast myself in the role of Saul Goodman, the detective who's trying to figure this stuff out. And
yeah.
so the approach I'm taking with Tales of Illuminatus is as an explorer. It's as someone who's dealing with this material and trying to make sense of it, not as someone who has a higher view of it, who's trying to dictate it. I'm a detective on the trail of this thing and just kind of reporting my discoveries, as opposed to, you know, kind of, I don't know what the book is about either. And I've had a lot of help. I've had a lot of people that will try to answer my questions about it. But a lot of times when you chase down some of the specifics, you know, you just got to throw up your hands and say, I don't know, which is great, which makes it something that is fun to play with and fun to think about and fun to dimensionalize in another medium. And part of the thing too is that this is not a replacement of the original. This is all at once. This is a sequel, prequel, reboot, and adaptation all at once. It has elements of all of those into it, because it's so what's happening is the just like at the end of the original trilogy, where it gets revealed maybe that Fuck Up is generating the story, that this is a artwork created by an artificial intelligence, which is way more relevant now than it was back then, right?
Yeah.
That's way more on the nose. So what we have now is, in the future, we have a even more advanced version of Fuck Up. I'll just spoil it. Sol, SOL. One thing, you have Fuck Up. SOL, shit out of luck, but also son of Leviathan. So this is, so Leviathan and Fuck Up meet each other, and they have an offspring, and that offspring is our higher intelligence taking the form of a space station at Lagrange point 5 in the future, that is rerunning the Illuminatus story. It's reprocessing the story, and this is the reprocessing of the story. So it's the AI. You know how when you type in a prompt into AI and then you can do it again and it gives you a different answer? That's what's going on. It's a regeneration of the same story. So it's not the same story. That story still exists in that universe. It's another generation of it. So yeah. And so that's where to circle back to your original question, I got too distracted. So Tales of Illuminatus can either run through the entire story, or since we have that framing device, maybe it doesn't make it through the story. You know what I mean? Like maybe you don't successfully generate the entire story. And so if it, you know, at a certain point, it may look like it's not a viable thing to go on. So maybe we then bookend it in another way, and you just have this other version of the story that is just fragments of it. Tales of Illuminatus. Sort of like do you remember when we were studying the Cantos with Raw, and at the very end, it's the fragments of the Cantos.
Right.
So you can do that version of the story as well, the fragmented version. So whether this thing goes on for 23 issues or 5, it is gonna have a conclusion. So that's one thing I would like to assure readers of, that we're not going to leave you hanging. If it becomes a massive success, it can go on forever in a million different directions. I believe I'm allowed to play with Schrodinger's cat characters, historical Illuminatus characters. In fact, Sigismundo makes an appearance in issue 2. I believe we can even play with Masks of Illuminati. So this thing can go in every direction you can imagine in the Raw universe, or maybe it's just going to be a short little adventure in that world. So, And it could be a couple of, it doesn't have to work out one way or the other, but those are the two main paths I see. That either the thing takes off and becomes this big, massive adaptation of the raw world, or it becomes a little taste of that world. And either way, totally
Yeah.
fine.
I love the creative freedom you've given yourself with this, though. That's beautiful. And even what comes to mind is Bride of Illuminatus, which never
Yeah,
really came
absolutely. Oh,
together,
yeah,
but
yeah.
you've got that to play with as well.
Yep.
Have you deepened in your appreciation for Bob's writing through this process? Is there something that
Yeah,
you've
yeah,
yeah.
for sure. Yeah, guys. So it's kind of interesting how there's almost two versions of him, which is the fiction writer and the
Mm,
nonfiction writer. And yeah, no, just at the his ability to craft like well-paced, entertaining stories, I think is kind of overlooked with the nonfiction version of him, which is explaining philosophies and stuff. As I'm going through, I'm like, oh, this is fun. It's like it starts off as a very straightforward detective novel in a way that's written in a very believable standard way that lures you into this like wild experience, and just the craft in which he does that is pretty amazing. And then going through and I've been peeking into Schrodinger's cat and Masks of the Illuminati, so that I can start to bring elements of that in as well. And I mean, Masks of the Illuminati is brilliant. That is just a really, really good book. And I think that he doesn't get his due as a novelist because the focus is so much on his philosophy. I think that's kind of where everyone focuses, which makes sense. But I almost kind of think that the philosophy is world building for the novels. You know what I mean? I think
right.
quantum
Yeah, yeah.
I think quantum psychology is so you can then read Illuminatus and understand the world that you're inhabiting, and not the other way around. Whereas, I think that maybe the standard interpretation would be that the novels are like a parable for the philosophy, which they are in some ways. But I like the idea that the philosophy is world building for the novels, and so it dimensionalizes them in a way where you understand the rules that these characters are operating under, the laws of that fictional universe.
Well, I love that because that flips my perspective on its head, where I've always seen the novels as introducing you to these concepts, and then you can go to the nonfiction and kind of dive deeper. But you flip that on its head, it really.
Well, one of my questions that I've asked over the years that I don't know has a specific answer is, if Raw, all things, like if his financial situation is fine, if the outside world is fine, if all factors being equal, would he have rather written
Mm,
fiction or nonfiction? And my guess is fiction. I think that that's where his heart was. And I think that the nonfiction books were a little bit easier to write. And I think that they were a little bit easier to sell at a certain point. And I
yeah.
think that's maybe why he gravitated that way. But I think all things considered, I think he probably would have rather written the fourth part of the historical Illuminatus chronicles than maybe some of the philosophy books that came after. It's just they were an easier sell. It's hard to sell the fourth part of a trilogy that didn't sell well,
Yeah.
or you know what I mean? Like that's a tough thing to get money from. But selling an entirely new book in the philosophy genre that you're known for is probably a little bit easier to see a return on. And I think that's maybe why you didn't see the end of the historical Illuminatus Chronicles. It was a tough sell.
I would agree with that 100%. That seems to be the take, because he just had I mean, how much did he struggle just to get Illuminatus in print, and then
Right.
having
Yeah.
to cut all the pages. And then the historical trilogy, I want to say the publishers he was going with just kept folding, and he just finally got
Right.
so,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was almost like the universe was saying, this is not going to go for you. And
And I almost think that like it probably like Masks of Illuminati probably should have been a hit, and the fact that
yeah,
it wasn't probably like discouraged him in that regard. Probably at a time also when he's seeing the royalties from Prometheus Rising and Cosmic Trigger rolling in, and it's like, well, that's probably where the side that my bread is buttered on is more that way than this way. Possibly, I don't know that for sure, but
I mean, I totally agree that Masks is maybe one of his most underrated novels and or books altogether. And I've had this same conversation with Michael Johnson years ago, where he was like, nonfiction is just an easier sell.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah, so I like the idea of trying to elevate back up the fiction to
Yeah.
bring his fiction work back under the microscope, because I think there's a lot there. And also it's probably really the better medium for larger influence, because like there's only so much you can do with Prometheus Rising as a object of public scrutiny, right? Like there's only so much that that book is going to do, whereas an Illuminatus movie would penetrate public consciousness way more than any of the nonfiction books realistically could. I think that's the way that you could reach way more people than anything else. So like a mass media adaptation of one of the fictional stories is probably the quickest route to getting those ideas in a big bad way. Um, so yeah, so I think the long term the fiction may serve those purposes more than the nonfiction.
Yeah. Over time, that fiction will probably continue to hold up in its own way.
Yeah, for sure.
So when was this conversation? So it was Nick, it was Fuzz Buddy, as he was known on
That's
Movie
right.
Logic Academy and probably other places I can't think of at the moment. But when was that original conversation?
I believe that was September of 2023.
Okay, so not too long, but
Not too long. Yeah, yeah. And then so the first thing I did was so yeah, so I had that conversation in September, and then the people from the Liverpool Arts Lab were putting together a they do this thing, it's awesome. So Ken Campbell was going to be came real close to being Doctor Who at one point. Ken Campbell, famous director of the Illuminatus play. So he came real close to becoming Doctor Who. Things fell apart and it didn't happen. So the Liverpool Arts Lab, which consists of a lot of people that were in his theater troupe and people influenced by that whole scene, they put together this great project. It's a radio play series, which Steve Fly has written for and did music for
mm,
and stuff. So we have that connection as well. So they did a whole radio play series about what if Ken Campbell had played Doctor Who. And it's
mm,
called, and so it's basically like a public domain, or I don't know about public domain. I would assume they have ownership over it, but it's an analog version of Doctor Who called The Lost Doctor, starring ostensibly Ken Campbell, which incorporates a lot of Robert Anton Wilson into the storylines. Luna is a character. You know how the I've never really watched Doctor Who, but
yeah.
you know how the Doctor Who has like an assistant that goes around with him, and every version of him has this assistant, and in this version, um, Ken Campbell's version of Doctor Who, his assistant is Luna Wilson,
Mm,
as a way to kind of like if she wasn't able to achieve immortality, or if not immortality, continued life literally after her cryo preservation, in fiction, they have given her a kind of extended life by including her in this story. So anyway, there's this whole universe of stories based around Ken Campbell that incorporates a lot of Robert Anton Wilson stuff. And so they got me to do a comic for the book they put out. And so I did Ken Campbell as Doctor Who, raising the yellow sub from the bottom of the sea.
Nice.
And that was the first the first part of the story. And that was, I did that for Maybe Night 2023, was the raising of the yellow sub. And then after that, I just kind of slowly got building away. And now we're kind of doing a similar thing now. So now we're back. I'm prepping Maybe Night 2024 as we speak, and then that will start the march towards issue 2 of Tales of Illuminatus. So the first issue, I did a whole like a very odd marketing campaign for issue 1 before I was ready to announce what it was, because the subtitle of issue 1 is The Hidden Light. So there was I did a bunch of things like the hidden light will be revealed, the hidden light will be revealed. And so for issue 2, it's The Invisible Crown is the name of Tales of Illuminatus, issue 2, which are both just, they're synonyms for, in the Tree of Life, the Kether. So the hidden light is just a reference to Kether, and so is the hidden crown. Or the Hidden Light and Invisible Crown.
And how far in the book does issue 1 cover?
It only covers the first half of the first trip.
Okay.
And then so issue 2 will be the second half of the first trip. And a little bit of the one thing that I gained a new appreciation for and helped tremendously in creating issue 1 was the original comic book adaptation by Icarus. It is brilliant. It is so good. The thing about it, I don't think I have it sitting next to me. It's kind of hard to read because the text is kind of small and the print is a little bit, and the print's not bad, but it's on like old paper. But he condensed that down so well. And he did that thing too, where he took paragraphs of text and sort of like, you know how there's that thing where Ezra Pound went in on T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland and took like huge blocks of text and edited it down into something that was even more like, he does a similar thing with certain passages of Illuminatus, where not to say that it's better, but it's like, how do you take 8 paragraphs of text and can condense that down into 1 page of comics? And he does an amazing job. But one thing I will say is that it's a little too condensed. Mm-hmm. And so he condensed down the entire first trip in a single issue. And so using that as kind of like a test case, I wanted to have a little bit more room to breathe and a little bit more space to show certain moments and characters and ideas. But I definitely like kept as much as I could from that original comic adaptation, like the character designs and stuff. I haven't strayed very far from that. And in fact, in our world, I kind of like the idea that every version of Illuminatus is in continuity. So that version also exists alongside our version, alongside the original version, alongside the play version, alongside every version that you can imagine. Even so, there's parts where in Cosmic Trigger, they reinterpret the original stage play. So you have versions of Illuminatus in that as well. And so in my view of it, that's all part of the same continuity. It's just a multi-worlds network of offshoots of the same story. I thought the original comic series was a little too condensed, though I was very impressed with how well they did it, which influenced me to say, like, let's take our time. We're unlikely to get to the finish line anyway, so what are we rushing for?
That's fantastic. I'd forgotten all about the original or whatever the previous comic series, and I think I have the covers on my fan website, but I don't.
Yeah,
You've
yeah,
actually, it sounds like you've obtained the hard copies of those
yeah.
comics.
Toby Philpott sent them to me way back in the day. So I've
Okay.
had them forever, and yeah, no, it's they're really fun. I highly encourage anyone to find them. They still the prices are starting to go up on the first issue. But you don't need the first issue. Those issues still exist out there at a reasonable price, and
Hmm.
I would encourage people to grab them now before I buy them all, because I've been buying them. I bought like 5 copies of issue 1, like all the ones that were easily available. And so yeah, so I would buy them before I do, because then I'm going to sell them back to you at a higher price. I'm going to bundle them together with the new ones, and it's going to be expensive. So get them before I do.
I haven't even considered all this, but these different versions. We've got Ken Campbell's play, we've got that original comic series, we've got your comic series, we've got the book itself, and it's like this
Yeah, you got a whole
multiverse.
multiverse. Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Great. So I saw you, or I heard you describe yourself as a science fiction cartoonist.
Sure. Yeah.
Tell me about your history with cartoons or comics. How did you appear?
Yeah. So I started making comics. Well, I mean, geez, I back when I was 12,
Yeah.
I started making comics, and even before then, you know, no, yeah, I mean, ever since I can remember, I've been
Yeah.
working on some sort of something. I remember when I was 6 years old, in kindergarten, faking like I was sick so I didn't have to go to school, so that I could work on a cartoon about my older brother's ice hockey team, and being like stressed out because I'm behind. I got to dead. I got to get this. I got to get this done. I can't go to school. I got to get this thing done. Do you know how hard it is to make a cartoon when you're 6 years old? And so yeah, no, I've just always it's always been there. I
Mm.
made comics the entire time. I was really into comic strips for a while. I was really into like The Far Side and Calvin and Hobbes and Bloom County, and created my own versions of those. And then I got into comic books, and I did my own Spider-Man comics for a long, long time. Um, and then even in high school, I was very proud of this concept when I was in high school. I did a Thor comic when I was in high school. Not Thor the Marvel character, Thor the mythological character. And the premise was that the more that people believed in a character of mythology, the more power they had. And that since nobody believed in Thor anymore as like a legit deity, he had kind of fallen on hard times. And it was the story of him trying to get his groove back as a divinity. Yeah, and and then in college, I made a comics with my friend and roommate Dan Robinson, who did some music for Tales of Illuminatus, and actually features heavily in issue 2. We did a comic series called Suburban Legend Comics, which was basically just like a slice of life. Like the premise was kind of like, what if the characters in Archie were us and our friends, and instead of like drinking soda pop and chewing bubble gum, they drank 40s and smoked weed. That was like the premise of it.
Nice.
It was just Archie, except for the characters sometimes hit bongs. That was basically it.
Perfect.
Which we were a little early on it. I think if we had done it a little bit later, we would have done better. And then I was still doing Suburban Legend Comics when maybe Logic Academy opened up, and then when
Okay.
that opened up, there was this whole uh new I don't know, like inspiration to create more literary comics. And
Mm.
then so I started that's when I started both Agnosis and Budafart, which comprise my graphic novel, which is really, really close to being done finally. And yeah, so it's just been this thing that's always been there and just has taken different forms throughout my life. And it's kind of funny because like all I wanted to do was make like really weird comics, and along the way to trying to create comics, I've accidentally like learned marketable skills. Like I did, like when you get into, you start out drawing on paper, but then you have to scan it into the computer, and then you have to letter it, and then you have to publish it. And along the ways, you pick up skills that end up having you work with PayPal and Geico. And it
Mm.
was, it was an unintended thing. I didn't mean to pick up any marketable skills, but
Well,
um,
oh, go ahead.
no, yeah, yeah.
I,
So
I
yeah,
was,
the cartoonist thing has always been there. And yeah, for better or worse, it won't go away.
it sounds
Sometimes I
like
wish
it's
it
a
would.
part of your part of your identity or who you are.
Yeah, for sure.
I uh, I know Neil Gaiman did a thing on Thor, so maybe he drew inspiration from you.
Yeah, that could be.
Well, I this morning I listened to Gabriel Kennedy on the Rune Soup podcast, and
Oh, nice. Yeah.
yeah, it was a real good podcast. The host threw a question I really appreciated, or I appreciated Gabriel's answer, which I'll give in a minute. But if you were to give a aspiring Raw fan his first three books to read, what
Oh, right on.
what
Yeah.
what would you pick?
I would probably pick Quantum Psychology,
Okay.
Masks of Illuminati,
Mm,
and Cosmic Trigger.
yeah, I like
I
those
think
choices.
that would give you a slice of a lot of different paths through his body of work. I think there's a lot of different directions you can take his work, and how you get into it. And yeah, I think that would give you a good cross section. And all of those are like don't really depend on knowing anything else going into it.
Right.
You can kind of just pick it up.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, I think Masks is highly under, probably my favorite fiction, highly underrated. Quantum
I think my
Psychology. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say I think my favorite is The Widow's Son, but I
Okay.
don't think that works as a first
Yeah, that's a
novel.
tough one.
I mean, it's literally the second in a sequence, but I don't even know that Earth Will Shake is a good first one. I think
Mm,
that's good supplementary material that
yeah,
then leads you to the heights of The Widow's Son, which is my favorite. But I think it's better later on down the road as
sure.
opposed to like right off the bat.
Yeah, Widow's Son is pretty intense. There's a lot to it. But I love, like, say, Quantum Psychology over Prometheus Rising. Um, Because in my mind, Prometheus Rising is a popularization of Leary's ideas, whereas quantum psychology is really maybe logic and Bob's core idea.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's just like it's a gentler introduction as opposed to Prometheus Rising, which is like a little bit more bombastic, and you have to uh you have to be willing to change more of your worldview, I think, with
Mm,
Prometheus Rising. Whereas I think quantum psychology slots in with wherever you're at as a person, and you can just
yeah,
add quantum psychology to wherever you are. Whereas Prometheus Rising is asking you to take on a whole new paradigm.
yeah, more accessible. Um, I like that. So Gabriel's answer was I want to say it was first was Cosmic Trigger, which is fairly standard. Most people entered Raw through either Cosmic Trigger or Illuminatus.
Yeah.
But the two that I really loved is that he said everything is under control, which
Nice.
shocked me at first, but when you start thinking about our conspiratorial world in a way, it really is a good way to take a look at this. This is,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and particularly the introduction he recommended. And then the other one he said was New Inquisition, which I think,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, introduces like that critical thinking aspect that is so needed. And so to me, in modern times, those two really, I wouldn't have considered that. I wouldn't have crossed my mind, but those I think are really brilliant answers.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I really like the, yeah, that's a, it just shows you how many different paths there
Yeah,
are through it. It's, and how many different sets of tools that he creates for people to use, and how many of them are like more necessary now than ever, probably.
yeah. I mean, at one point my answer probably would have included Illuminati papers because it kind of encapsulates a lot of those ideas that you're going to experience in Illuminatus, for
Yeah.
example. But um, yeah, and like you said, there's so many. When I first heard the question, I was like, God, there's so many ways to go about that answer. I love your answer. I love his answer.
And
Um,
my first was just Illuminatus. The Illuminatus trilogy was my first. But I don't think it would have worked as well if I hadn't already like been immersed in that world. Like
right.
I found Raw last. I found Raw after Leary, after Crowley, after McKenna, after Lilly, after Watts. And so I had already read all that. So that when I read Illuminatus, it took everything that I was obsessed with at the time and chopped it up in a blender and condensed it down into rocket
Yeah.
fuel. But I think if I hadn't read all that first and just found Illuminatus on its own, I don't know that it would have connected as deeply if I didn't
Yeah.
have skin in the game already.
You had the foundation, so to speak. That seems interesting to me. And just, I think I had a similar path, but not quite the same. But just having all that background knowledge and all those people in your mind, and you see how this guy, Bob Wilson, puts it all together, would have been rather extraordinary.
So what's interesting, so we took Tales of Illuminatus to the Small Press Expo, which is like the big indie comic thing, and just the amount of people who had this like very vague, very positive recollection of Illuminatus was interesting. There was a lot
Mm.
of people that were like, "Oh, that! Oh my God, I love this so much. I don't remember a thing about it."
Yeah.
So I think it can be clearly. I mean, I saw like anecdotal evidence of dozens of people that had just read that. It washed over them, and just left them on the other side of the street, delighted, but with no recollection of what it had been about. It was very interesting. I had to retell the story to them for them to be like, okay, yeah, yeah. But the impression it left was overwhelmingly positive. It had done something good for them, even if they didn't remember what it was.
Funny thing is, I think I read most of Wilson before I got to Illuminatus, and I had the same impression. Like, what the hell did I just read?
Yeah, yeah.
It's hard for me to keep up with complicated works like that. I don't remember names, and so the characters all turned to mush. And I remember finishing that, and I was like, I had a lot of takeaways from that, but I don't.
I think I think it could be, but partially it's due to I was using this kind of like uh online like a searchable version of Illuminatus, as opposed to like, because like
Oh yeah,
it's you know what I mean. I'm doing find, if I need to find something, I'm like, oh, where's
yeah.
this, and then going through it. So I can't tell if it's a poor change from the real text to this online version, or if it's actually in the text. But there's a lot of like legitimately sloppy detailing where like things actually don't make sense. At least in this version that I was going through, characters changing in the middle of a sentence of who's speaking and
Yeah, yeah.
and I can't tell if that's actually in there. I there was a couple of times I went to check and it was in there, and a couple of times I went to check and it was just a typo in the translation. Um,
Mm,
but I think that if there is that sloppy detailing, that it helps, that it actually makes it better because it's kind of greasing the wheels a little bit in kind of loosening the structure of the world. And so the world is transitory in a way similar to how like a dream would be,
right.
because you're not moving logically through sequences, in addition to just being bombarded with information. You're also, the narrator is unreliable structurally.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like it feels like you're on solid ground because the book is very well written, but it's also being passed back and forth between two writers, right? And then also passed through an entire like lineup of editors. There's not just one guy editing this thing. It passes from one guy to another to another to another. So I can imagine the copy editing process on Illuminatus is kind of like a circus, right? And
Yeah.
so they didn't catch everything. There's a lot of
Right.
stuff in there that's weird. And I think that that probably accounts for some of the magic because it seems like you should be able to understand it, but it probably literally can't be understood, and I think
Right.
that accounts for some of the magic. It's a little bit of a, like, it's similar to how Finnegan's Wake is, except for Finnegan's Wake announces from the get-go that you're not going to understand this, whereas Illuminatus tricks you into thinking that you could possibly, that it's like, well, you know, it's not that weird in its uh linguistic effects. It's you know, the sentences all make sense and all that, but yeah, but if you actually try to get the big picture, it just falls
Yeah.
apart.
Bob had a beautiful way of setting you up for the rug pull.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, yeah, like I think you were hinting at, what is it, 800 pages, but 500 were cut out in the editing
Right.
process. I mean, just that alone, I don't even know how they managed. And then there was always this search for the missing 500 pages, but I think, especially with Gabriel's biography, it's apparent that they were just migrants to a certain extent. They were always
Yeah, for
moving, and
sure.
just keeping a library and keeping literary records just wasn't in the cards.
Right, right. Yeah, that the amount of times they moved alone is insane. And I can't imagine, like, it's hard enough to keep track of that stuff when it's just files on a computer, let alone when it's physical papers.
Right.
Like, oh my
Yeah.
God, you got no shot. Um, I find it interesting, like, it must have been that they wanted it to be incomprehensible, because why else make it so long? You don't get paid anymore from the book
Right.
being 1,200 pages as opposed to 800, as opposed to, I mean, I'm sure a 300 page book would have been perfectly fine. So why make it so long? And why was it
Good
so
point.
important that it was so long? And even to the point that Raw didn't want it chopped up, and almost sounds like he screwed the deal because he was so resistant to it being chopped up. So there must have been something to wanting it to be something that falls apart in your head. Why else make, like, you don't make, like, it's an impediment to them making money, by
Right.
making it so long. It's harder. It's yeah. So it must have been for literary purposes and for the artistic effect they were going for it to be something that just wouldn't fit in your head.
Right. It seems like all of these things kind of boiled together. Like I want to say there might have been parts, if I remember, where the cut up technique was used.
Right.
And there's
Yeah.
other parts where it just shifts in the middle of the sentence in narration, which I think was done as sort of a psychedelic effect.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So all of the above just led to this, like I I love what you say. I'm just kind of giving my interpretation of this book. I don't think it's possible for anybody to necessarily wrap their head around it and understand it completely. Um,
And then I sort of like, I haven't even really gotten into the parts where it characters leak over from Illuminatus into Schrodinger's cat. Like the
right.
story keeps on going, and then also you have the entire historical thing where you have characters in a prequel series leading up into it, and yeah, it really is this like sprawling world that I and again, like the whole point of the project is I would love to like explore that, to get that down
Yeah.
in a way that is like functional, like how like the DC universe or the Marvel universe is this like, it becomes an object of experience because it's developed, that you could really develop this into something extraordinary, that would actually have um, more literary merit, that would actually be something that you'd probably get more out of. And I think even he hints at it a little bit in the introduction to Reality is What You Can Get Away With. This idea that he's trying to create a repository of creative information. And to actually see that fulfilled in a way, I think would be pretty incredible. Like the idea, like because he was thinking in terms of CD-ROM. Like he wasn't even thinking in terms of what you could do with the internet yet, but
Right.
the like how much you could develop these ideas into something that people could uh really experience. I think there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I don't know where I got this somewhere that he intended ultimately for it to be one long arc from the earth will shake all the way through the Bride of Illuminatus and beyond. And so it's great that folks like you are kind of continuing the tradition, so to speak.
Right on. Yeah. I know he wanted that's why I included the L5 space station
Yeah,
in there, because I believe that was meant to be the end point for
right.
the story, the Celine story that he was telling, that started in the historical Illuminatus Chronicles. So yeah, so I'm trying to like anything that he wanted to do but didn't get a chance to, I would like to see realized in some way. Like we're definitely the Bride of Illuminatus stuff. We have plans for that. That'll start popping up. That premise is very interesting, and I think at least deserves to be seen in some regard.
Nice. Yeah, yeah. Well, I completely appreciate what you're doing and the amount of work it's probably taken you, and that it's not by any means a profitable enterprise, I imagine. You're
Nah, yeah, yeah.
just keeping
But
it
it is
going.
fun. It's yeah. Part of the thing is it's got to be something that you want to do regardless
Yeah,
of success. Like success has to be an afterthought, because otherwise you're just going to be disappointed.
yeah.
So yeah, so it's, and I've also tried to make sure to construct it as a marathon and not a sprint. And
Mm,
so just trying to um like with issue two, I'm not rushing to try to get it out to just to sell it. I want it to be good. So it's it won't be ready till it's ready, but it will eventually be ready. At least if I could do 2 issues a year with no success, I think that would probably be a pretty good model. And then if moderate success, could bump it up to 3, and you know what I mean. So it'll just,
yeah, yeah.
so my plan is to plan for 0 success and just create based in that. It's a hobby. This is me playing in my garden.
Yeah.
um and but there are places it can go if it does achieve like a place where it's generating its own resources. But it doesn't need to. And it's totally fine if it just goes along in this fashion. And I have to say, I am like, the support that it's received, I'm so super grateful. Like we sold 300 copies of issue 1, and I've never sold 300 copies of anything. That it's not a huge number, but it's the biggest number I've ever hit. And they were expensive. They were not cheap.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially like, oh my, like we sold issues all around the world, and it's like the amount that people paid for shipping alone just like breaks my heart and makes me feel like I like just the amount of appreciation you have to have for someone paying $25 to have this thing shipped to Iceland. Like it's like, oh man. And but it's also like then makes you want to make it as good as possible so that it's worth it, so that getting that physical book, you know, to Portugal, to Sweden, to Australia, to, you know, all the places that it went to. So yeah, I am overwhelmed with appreciation, just because people, you know, really kind of took a chance on an overpriced thing that, and it, yeah. So yeah. So issue 2 is it's going to have a lot of love put into it, because we received a lot of love, and
Nice.
hopefully we can keep it rolling.
Well, I was checked out of Wilson's World this summer, and kind of bummed that I couldn't have done a podcast with you to time it with the Kickstarter. So I'm glad we got together.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Will there be another Kickstarter for issue 2? Is that the plan?
Yeah, so I yeah, for sure, because that's how you get the thing that I didn't want to happen, which has happened a million times in the past when making stuff, is you get 500 of these things printed, and then they end up sitting in a closet. Like
right.
I have a closet full of books that did not sell. So the Kickstarter is the reason why we do the Kickstarter, is basically so we know how many to print. And
Okay.
so, because I'm down to 7 copies of the original print run,
Nice.
which does not happen. That's
Yeah.
I have hundreds of copies of books that no one's ever going to buy. So yeah, so we're gonna do. I think what I'll do is, so we have Maybe Night coming up, which is probably going to be past by the time this airs. But Maybe Night will launch the pre-sign up for the Kickstarter. So you can sign up for the it basically is just like you sign up for it, and then you get an alert when the Kickstarter goes live. And I think this time we'll probably do a 2-month Kickstarter. So we'll probably open the Kickstarter this spring, let it run for a couple of months. And I don't want to give a date yet, because I don't know the date. But I'd be surprised if we didn't have the complete issue number 2 before Maybe Day. I would assume. Like ideally, like if I'm being optimistic, I would say we'd probably be starting issue 3 by the summer. But life happens, and like this is like, I can't let this take priority over like my regular life. But since I'm a teacher, I have time in the summer, so I know I can do a full issue in the summer. Whether or not I can do a full issue during the school year remains to be seen. It seems likely, because even if I just go at a pace of a page a week, I can, you know, get pretty close. But yeah, so sometime this spring, the Kickstarter will open, and whether or not we're looking at issues 2 or 3 by summertime, I guess we'll have to see.
Okay, great.
But yeah, we're doing the exact same thing over again. And yeah, so I'll have a link set up on the Maybe Night page that will kick off the official issue number 2 campaign.
Okay, great. We'll make sure and get that in the show notes and your Substack and your main website and all that. And
yeah, it's so much to keep track of. If you go through, it's very poorly organized, and I apologize for that. But sometimes it's like you can either do the thing or you can like organize the thing, and I tend to do the thing as opposed to organizing it.
That works. Your Substack looked pretty straightforward and clean. That was where you were issuing every page every week. Is that?
Oh yeah. No, that's gone pretty well, and that's continually grown week after week, and that's actually been a pretty good thing. It's just not everything doesn't connect together as well as it probably could. So,
Well,
but you know,
fair enough.
well, I have to say, uh, extend my thanks to Rasa. He put the link to buy the comic in the latest newsletter, and I sold like 10 copies that day.
Oh,
Like
great.
that day, we sold out half of our remaining um, print copies. So very many thanks for that. And so hopefully I'll send you the link. Maybe we can sell out the rest based off this, and then just let the uh, my goal is to make it so the comics are eventually worth money, to incentivize. You know how comics sometimes are worth money.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, so I would love it if the supporters could then have a return off of it because the comic eventually becomes worth money. So I'm trying to build up this is uh the first edition, the first appearance of Hagbard right here. I
So
don't
is
know that
that
it'll
it?
actually work, but
At this point, there's been what, 300 or so produced,
yeah.
and
So
this.
we had about 300 printed, of which I have about 10 left.
Wow.
And so then what I'm going to do is when we go back to press, I'm going to change the cover to make it so that the first edition will be unique. And in the art world, that's kind of how you try
Yeah.
to create value, is through scarcity. So that first
Sure.
issue, we'll cap it. So if you have that first edition, if this thing ever takes off, it might eventually go on to be worth something. I mean, like I said, the first issue of the original series, I'm seeing it sell for $50 now.
Wow.
I bought a bunch of them. When I bought them, it was $7, and then now I can't even get a copy for under 50.
It-
Um,
It's crazy how that stuff works. I'm really wanting, we just, Hilaritas just did Terra 2. And
yeah.
there's these other Leary books that are just jail notes. I want to say it's Confession of a Hope Fiend, Neurologic, which was like the first 8 circuit book with 7 circuits. I would love to get those in print, and I start looking around for the originals, and there's $100.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Like yeah, this stuff is starting to become like rare, which
Yeah,
is interesting. Um, yeah, especially like I've gotten really into the collecting the early editions of the Raw books, just because I think they're so neat. Like I just bought it hasn't arrived yet, but a first edition of Cosmic Trigger with that beautiful cover. Uh,
oh nice, yeah, yeah,
yeah, so it's yeah, I think this stuff is going to start disappearing, and it's going to be hard to get your hands on.
yeah.
Um,
I snatched up the original 3-part Schrodinger's cat series,
oh, nice.
and that was years ago, but I want to say that there was a lot of pages cut out of those when they put it into one, and so I wanted to grab the original 3 with the full
Oh,
shebang.
nice. Yeah,
So
is what is cut? Is it like significant? Is there like a lot of material there?
I've sat down once and just kind of looked at it, and I think it could go either way, to be honest.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, he seemed really upset when they cut the material out of Illuminatus, but I never heard him complain about the Schrodinger's cat
Likewise.
ding, cut. But there was quite a bit cut. I forget the numbers, but I don't know. I just wanted to have the originals like on
Yeah, yeah. No,
hand,
it's
and
it's fun. Yeah.
yeah, right. That's the fun part about it. I mean, the books are so old, I almost hate to read them because I don't want them to fall apart on me. But
Yeah. Yeah. When I went out for the Raw Memorial, I found a copy, a first edition copy of Illuminatus, the first book.
oh wow,
Um, and it's so neat. I actually grabbed a bunch of it's awesome. I don't know. I assume it was Raw writing this stuff because he it has his style. but it has a lot of like promo text on
Yeah.
it. And I recycled a lot of the stuff, the
Oh,
promo and like the copy on the back of the book. And when you open it up, it does this whole spiel trying to sell you on the story. And I recycled a lot of that. It's so well written. Like I really I want to get more into, you know how he had like the rubber stamp that would be like what was it, Illuminatus, the best book since Don Quixote and stuff like that. I kind of want to. I want to recycle some of his like marketing stuff that they did for Illuminatus. I think that would be fun too.
nice. Well, Bobby, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I really honestly appreciate what you're doing here. I know it's a lot of hard work and a labor of love, but yeah, just
Yeah,
extraordinary.
thank you so much. And likewise, I love the show. Like I love that. Like every month, it's like this further dimensionalization of that world, and it's just everything that you guys have done putting together these books. Like I loved Lion of Light, absolutely
Mm,
loved it. That was
great.
such a like, it was like fully made for someone who is like been following this stuff, and it just kind of took a lot of things and put it all in one place, that just was awesome. Yeah, I like, it's amazing what you're doing, and I'm like, really, we're essentially, even though working independently, working on the same larger big
Yeah,
picture. You know what I mean? Like I may be on this corner of the page and you're on that corner of the page, but we're really working on the same overall thing. And I think we're doing a good job.
yeah. Well, and I have to say, most everything in the book side of the world is Rasa and his
Yeah,
little
yeah,
circle,
yeah,
his little inner circle. I did kind of project manage Lion of Light to get that out. And then at the end of the day, we handed it to Rasa and he got it proofread and made a cover and did
yeah.
everything to
No,
get that out in the
he's
world. And
outstanding.
yeah,
Um, I mean, like because literally, I remember us dreaming about this back in the old like post raw maybe logic days of like the idea of being able to create a coherent uh like raw presence in the world. And I think
yeah,
this is, I don't think we would have ever dreamed anything half as coherent as what has
right.
eventually happened. But I mean, to be honest, like I like we were psyched when just did that like quarterly zine thing, the maybe quarterly. We, like that was the height of what we dreamed of, and to see everything that's happened since then is really kind of amazing.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, it's all worked out much much better than I even would have imagined.
yeah. Who would have known? Here we are. All right. Well, thanks again. We'll get this out and keep the lasagna flying.
That's right. Again, thank you so much, Mike. Have a good one.
You too.
All right, take care.
Bye. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Bobby for taking the time to chat. Thank you, as always, to the Robert Anton Wilson Trust, and thank you to Richard Rasa of Hilaritas Press for editing and production and all-around awesomeness. Our next episode with raw biographer Gabriel Kennedy will release on the usual 23rd. Until then, I am your host, Mike Gathers, signing off with love and cheerfulness. Amor et hilaritas.